Hey YouTube, it's been a hot minute. This is my first video in a while. I hit a long stretch of deadlines and then I went into final exam period. It's just that time of semester where everything is just due and in and everything gets thrown to the wayside. I'm coming to you today with a recently read and currently reading video. So first on my list, I'm going to share an unpopular opinion. So that's A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. So for those of you who don't know, A Court of Wings and Ruin, or Quart, is the third book of the Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas. It's widely popular. You'll find lots of people on BookTube raving about it. And I actually began this series, I think back in late 2016. And I think at the time I was really swept up in the hype and I really liked the series. I gave the first two books 5 stars. And then I took a break from the series. I was just doing other things and just reading other books. And I decided, yeah, I should pick up A Court of Wings and Ruin and just finish the series. And I tell you, I have not taken so long to read a book in a long time, even at my busiest. And I started reading and I found myself not enjoying the main couple and not enjoying the writing or the plot, and I'm like, wow, what happened? So a brief summary of the series is that there's this main character called Feyre who gets involved with a lot of fairy court politics when she accidentally kills a fairy beast. There's a lot of whirlwind romance and sometimes things get quite sexy. And when I've read the first 2 books, I really enjoyed the romance that came up, especially in the second book. I'm not going to get too into it because of spoilers, but I really found myself not enjoying the couple. I just found them insufferable. The main romantic lead, Rhysand, is just, I find him so insufferable. He basically has 2 instincts: to either get it on with Feyre or to sacrifice himself for his friends. Also, the writing was just awful because I listened to the first 2 books on audiobook, so I never noticed this before. But Sarah J. Maas puts so many ellipses in her sentences, like 7 on a page or something. And I know she's trying to do it for dramatic timing, but to me it just seemed like she was just staggering Feyre's narration. Like maybe Feyre was hiccuping in between sentences. And I was just left wondering, why did I enjoy the first 2 books and not this one? And I have a theory. I think 2016 Emily was really easily swept up by hype and also liked heroes like Rhysand. I gave it 2 stars on Goodreads. I really did not enjoy it. In the end, I was really reading it for a sense of completion of the series. I mean, I really want to enjoy Sarah J. Maas's writing. I basically stopped reading the Throne of Glass series because, like, not that I wasn't entertained, but I wasn't entertained enough to invest that much time to read those books because they're heavy. I had stopped being that invested and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm an ACOTAR girl. I guess I don't enjoy her writing as much as I thought I did, and I want to enjoy it. I want to participate in the hype and fangirl with everyone else, but I guess she's really just not for me. So I don't think anyone's gonna really disagree with me on the next one. I also read The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. So The Hate U Give is based a lot on the Black Lives Matter movement. It's about a girl, Star, whose friend is killed by a police officer while he's unarmed. And then as she deals with the repercussions of that death, she becomes more and more outspoken in the movement to protest the deaths of unarmed Black men. This book really moved me. Like, maybe the story wasn't always very strong. Sometimes it lost a bit of its momentum in the end, but I bought into the characters completely. They all felt so real and their voices were very strong. I would sit in a cafe listening to this book while doing other things and I had to stop myself from crying. The feelings that come across in the text are so raw. I really liked the commentary on race and code switching. I love how Star's parents are also their own fleshed out characters. I particularly enjoyed her dad's take on Harry Potter being really an allegory on gang politics. I actually watched the film with my boyfriend and the film is not a bad film, but I definitely don't think it brings the book's message across as strongly. It misses out some of the book's nuance and depth, and a lot of the characters aren't really drawn right. So I think the film is very well acted and it was a good effort, but still doesn't quite get the book's message across as strongly as it might want to. So if you want to watch the film, I highly recommend you read the book first. So moving into the end of April, I started to read Theft by Finding by David Sedaris. So Theft by Finding is basically David Sedaris' diaries from like the 70s to the early 2000s. So it's just basically a series of diary entries that are kind of slices of his life from a day in a certain year. And I didn't expect much of this book, honestly. I mean, I love David Sedaris, but I was just like, oh, it's his diary book, I'll listen to it, you know, and it'll be just nice and light. But I actually found it was really funny, and I was really sad when there wasn't more. He always has the greatest takes on just the goings-on of everyday life. He still manages to be so funny even in his own private thoughts. There are periods in the book where his life is pretty gritty and it's kind of hard to read about. When he's younger, he basically hitchhikes a lot and he's like searching for jobs, and he encounters a lot of really gross characters, and he also witnesses a lot of really awful goings on. A lot of it is him navigating life as a gay man back when homosexuality wasn't as widely accepted as it is now. So it's not without its rough moments, but it's also a really nice and leisurely read as well. Of course, with any book of David Sedaris', I highly recommend the audiobook. Next up, I read From Hell by Alan Moore. So basically From Hell is Alan Moore's take on Jack the Ripper. Alan Moore is pretty much upfront about who Jack the Ripper is right from the beginning, because really the story isn't about the mystery of Jack the Ripper. It's really trying to give a commentary on Victorian society in that era. There's a lot of royal conspiracy and machinations by secret societies, and with all these conspiracies and plots, a lot of really innocent people get trodden on. So the artwork in this book was done by Eddie Campbell, and it took a while to get used to his drawing style because it's quite scratchy, almost to the point of blurring little details. When I first opened the book, I was like, ooh, I'm not sure how I feel about this drawing style, because like sometimes people's hands are just like a squiggle of lines. But then I got used to it, and it actually really made sense for the story, and actually it becomes quite dynamic, especially in the deeper, more intense parts of the book. If you're interested in this book, keep in mind to not rush through a reading of this book because it's heavily layered, heavily philosophical. Basically, Alan Moore was meant to be read slowly, and I really have to give props to Alan Moore because he did so much research, like a PhD's worth of research around this particular character. I mean, these murders were so gruesome, and while there were only 5 of them, but they still have an impact on the British psyche to this day, almost to the level of myth. And of course, a lot of the facts probably got caught up in the sensationalism around these events. So I gave this book 4.25 stars on Goodreads. It wasn't quite Watchmen level enjoyment, but I still really enjoyed the book. Next up, I read A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. This, of course, is the sequel to An Ember in the Ashes. So An Ember in the Ashes was about a society based around Roman culture and hierarchy. You have your really educated people who are now relegated to the lower ranks of society, and then you have a class of trained gladiators, essentially training in this military school. You have Laya, who's one of the scholar class, and her brother was arrested for being part of the resistance, and she makes a deal with the resistance that if she goes and spies for the military academy, then they will help her get her brother back. And then you also have Elias, who is one of the creme de la creme of the military academy, but he doesn't really want this life. He never really had a choice. And then there's his friend Helene, who's his best friend and has always had feelings for Elias. So I liked that this sequel kind of leaned into more of the magical elements of this world a bit more, but I think the story I was most invested in was Helene's, because she's caught in this really horrible situation. Her loyalties are torn, and she has a really tragic story arc in this book. So yeah, it was quite devastating because, like, you know, even if Elias and Laya were kind of suffering in their own way, Helene just really took it for them and just really had the short end of the stick, in my opinion. I really enjoyed this book, 4.25 stars from me. So I forgot to mention, for May, I started doing the Asian readathon, and so Torch Against the Night was one of the first books I read for that. I also just finished Warcross by Marie Lu. To summarize it for people, it's kind of like Ready Player One, but for the female YA demographic. So there's this genius boy inventor who's kind of invented like a whole new VR system. He discovered that you could basically make the human mind buy into VR if you just linked the system up to their brains, and that's how Warcross was invented. I got the vibe that there was also kind of a League of Legends vibe to it because there's a tournament, but there were also parts of it that were kind of like an M.T. Anderson world in Fee, where you can kind of cyclically talk to a person. So the main character is Amika Chen, and she kind of makes her living by catching people who gamble on Warcross, but sometimes she also hacks into Warcross to take people's goods for herself. But then one day she kind of glitches into a Warcross tournament. She doesn't do it very successfully because she's seen by everyone, but this turns into a job opportunity for her with this inventor of Warcross. And she gets involved in this big conspiracy involving Warcross. The dark net is involved. Overall, I really liked how developed this world was. I thought it was a really solid system. As an aspiring computational linguist, it kind of amused me to see how there was just automatic translation going on when someone spoke to you in a different language. Because oh my god, automatic translation has such a long way to go. I thought maybe the character of Hideo, the Warcross inventor, I didn't quite buy him as a boy genius. His character conception seemed a little bit too YA for me. There's also a portion of the book where I was seriously scared that it was going to become a very typical YA novel. But actually there was a big twist towards the end, which really changed things for me. So I also really enjoyed this book. So a book I literally just finished yesterday is Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. It's basically about a boy named Kafka who is escaping from home. Basically his father made a prophecy that he would basically relive the Oedipus myth of being with his mother and killing his father. Meanwhile, there's another character called Nakata who can talk to cats. Because of a really mysterious brain-damaging incident when he was a kid, he's slightly mentally impaired, but he's hella good at communicating with cats and having really fleshed out conversations with them and bringing lost cats back home. It's really hard to describe this book and do it justice. So the whole narrative is very dreamlike. I feel like the book sort of sets you up like it's trying to help you solve a mystery, and you're trying to put things together and put together the internal logic of the book. But I think after a while you kind of stop trying to put the pieces together logically, because really the whole thing reads like a dream. It's almost like the whole book is like a surrealist painting. There's a lot of philosophical conversation about the nature of the conscious and the unconscious. Haruki Murakami writes so beautifully, even in translation. He really weaves different narratives together really well, and you totally bought into the idea that they were two different main characters. I never got bored with either character. Would have liked more answers in the end, but I also realized that that's not really the point. Some parts at the end dragged a little bit for me, but overall, like, I really kept up with the book. I found it a surprisingly easy read. So 4.5 stars from me on Goodreads. So at the moment, I'm taking a break from Asian Readathon, and I'm reading The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. It's about this girl called Alice who has been on the run her whole life with her mother. They're kind of nomads. They travel from place to place and just never stick around anywhere for very long. But then one day her mother disappears, so she has to dig more into her mother and therefore her grandmother's past. Her grandmother was really known for a book called Tales of the Hinterland, and the Hinterland is kind of this fantastical place. And in order to solve the mystery of her mother's disappearance, Alice has to enlist the help of this guy from school called Ellery Finch, who is a huge fan of her grandmother's book about the Hinterland. I'm about 100 pages in. I would say the first 70 pages have been altogether too slow. There's been a lot of exposition and flashback and background, some of which I'm not sure was completely necessary. But we're starting to get into the more fairy tale like bits of the book, and now I'm just like, now you're talking. I've seen kind of mixed reviews of this book, so we'll see where it goes. I'm really hoping this fairy tale atmosphere keeps up. I also just started reading Winter Song by S. Jae-Jones. It's supposed to be a take on the Goblin King myth, and also it's supposed to be very similar to the movie Labyrinth. I'm literally 3 pages in. I really couldn't tell you my initial thoughts at the moment, except I'm getting a similar fairy tale vibe. Fairy tale like stories seem to be the theme of the moment. So I'm lucky. I had a couple really busy months, but I still managed to make time to read and de-stress at the end of a long day. Overall, pretty much a 4-star month of reading. Coming up soon, there's probably going to be a review of the movie Tolkien that just came out. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads, and I will see you in my next video.